Often I think what students miss out is that experience
Right.
in college or in high school. I definitely am an advocate for career break. I don't think there is a linear path, as I mentioned. Students should explore their interests. Gen Z that we address, Gen Alpha probably, they are all very accomplished in their own respects, given they're all digital natives. They have access to so much information at all times. To an extent, to the detriment, I find sometimes, because it leads to distraction. If you ask me, how does my academic preparation relate to this? The short answer is it doesn't, but it definitely has informed it. It's easy to see from hindsight and say, oh, Gen Z doesn't have a purpose. But that's not true, right?
People who are just starting off in leadership roles or who do aspire to be in one, what would be your advice? You did mention about people management and that being center of everything that we do. So what would be your advice to them about managing people?
I think it's really important to build trust. Trust again sort of goes back to those first principles of purpose, clarity in communication, clarity of goal setting, followed by that element of compassion and empathy. All that brings trust, right? All that builds trust.
Welcome to the Learner's Talk by GradLink. I am Sanya Gupta, your host for today's episode, Unfiltered with Arjun Dutta, who's our guest for today. I would like to welcome him. Hello, thank you. Thanks a lot for coming today. So, tell us something about yourself.
Thanks for having me, Sanya. You got my name correct. I'm with Navitas. I address their portfolio across India and Sri Lanka, across all different destinations.
Right.
And I look forward to having this chat with you.
Great. So, our podcast is about listening to experiences. So, we welcome guests here as, of course, professionals or students, but also as people who are here to share their experiences that our viewers can feel inspired from, can learn from. So, I think our talk is going to be more around, your unfiltered, like the episode is titled, your unfiltered experiences, advices through your experiences to our viewers. And our viewers can be anyone. They could be students who are still figuring out what to do, could be parents, could be someone in the middle still, struggling with the decisions they might have made. So yeah, that's how we're going to go about this. So we'll start with the career choices of students. How would you share through your experiences that does it have to be a very traditional thing, like, okay, we complete our high school, we get into a degree straight away, might not know why we're going for that degree, and then struggle for job. So what I have observed, read about, seen around me is more of a struggle after the degree. And in the worst case scenario, there's a first degree and there's a soon after MBA, no matter, what you would have done. So what would be your thoughts or your advice to people through your experiences?
Yeah, I think, in candor, there isn't a straight path. It's an unfortunate notion that we might have that, everything is linear. So you do your high school, you know exactly what you want to do in college, you do that degree, and you land up in the job of your choice. It sounds very fantastical to me, and I think in 9 out of 10 cases it is never the case.
Right.
So I think that notion that everything has to be linear should be dispelled. That being said, I think what students, particularly in this instance, your audience is obviously students who are perhaps looking to study in India, but also looking to obviously go abroad into different destinations. I think the path of admissions, the documentation requirements, the grades that are needed, the standardized tests that are needed, that's fairly documented, that's fairly regimented as well, that's hard work. But I think the missing link is from getting there to thriving there.
Right.
That's the missing link. And what do you do when you're in the program, right? As I said, you're not really looking at, it's good that you have aspirations that, look, I want to set out and I want to study, engineering, and then thereafter I want to perhaps get an MBA, depending on my inclination, whether I want to work in finance or along any of those proclivities. Uh, but often, I think what students miss out is that experience
Right.
in college or in high school. I definitely am an advocate for career breaks. I don't think there is a linear path, as I mentioned. Students should explore their interests. More so now. I think the audience that we deal with, Gen Z, that we address, Gen Alpha probably, uh, they are all very accomplished in their own respects, given they're all digital natives,
Right.
right? They have access to so much information at all times. To an extent, to their detriment, I find sometimes because it leads to distraction. But nevertheless, they have so much more at hand. So I think it's all the more important that they get the opportunity and the space to explore their needs. And if I can sort of expand on that in college, um, if you think about it, if you look at uh, the degree is very. If that's all you want to get, the degree, the exposure, the credential, all that is fairly commoditized, right? It's not any different from what you or my friend would do with the same program.
Right.
So the question should be, what is it that differentiates that? And I will submit that it's the experience that differentiates. Since the outcome is very commoditized,
Right.
right? So what do you do during the program? Do you make use of the facilities at hand? Do you meet with people? Are you social with people from all walks, all different cultures, right? That come into this melting pot. Um, what is your university really good at? Are there people who are doing cutting edge work in your university? I think those are all food for thought.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll probably pause there. Yeah.
Right. No, I think you've put it across very, in a good way for our viewers to understand. So you mentioned about career breaks. That would bring me, to my question about your career choices, your study choices. Like, how has it shaped over years? So tell us something about yourself.
Right. Yeah, so I've had a very unconventional route to my present job. I was an international student myself. Um, at the time, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to do engineering. And once I went for engineering, I quickly realized that my interests were actually stronger in the hard sciences, which is physics. So I ended up actually pursuing physics at my undergrad, along with other curiosities that led me down a rabbit hole, so to speak. And they were, I explored the liberal arts, and I explored music included. So in hindsight, I could see that I could say that it's been a very rich learning experience for myself. But it was, whatever I did was intentional, right? So I over indexed on the learning component, but not necessarily on the outcome, right? So when I say I have a sort of a circuitous path to my present job, I'm not from this sector. After my undergrad, I actually went on for my PhD. I dropped out of that program, went into a startup environment, and then thereafter I joined this. So I think the one common thread that I was following is curiosity, right? So in my present position, if I look back, I could not draw a straight line for you. All I can tell you is that we, sort of moving back to your first question, I think we underestimate the strength of transferable skills. Students don't often see that when they do it.
Right.
Also, the question of intentionality. I think my advice to people is, or students would be intentional, whether it's professional or whether it's your personal relationships. I think intentionality has always given rich dividends. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Right. So you are at a leadership role. You are in your current organization, that's Navitas. So that's something which people would really wish for, like a leadership role. It could be at any good organization. So how long did it take? What did it take for you to get where you are today? You mentioned that you've been following the common thread of curiosity all this while. Now, for a parent, just a kid telling them that okay, I am curious about a certain thing and I would like to pursue it. It could be different from just studies for that matter. It could be maybe photography for that matter, or anything which is not the favorite of a parent or does not make them feel very secure about their kid, that okay, would he or she be able to build a career in that. So while you were following the curiosity, how did you ensure that you were making a good career? How did you set those realistic expectations from yourself that okay, I'm not going to be in a dreamy world where it's just because people can take this in both the ways. Someone who has had experience might understand what you're exactly saying, but a kid might not. So yeah, just to help us understand that how did you actually work with that curiosity and be where you are today?
Thanks, Sanya. I think I would say that in terms of curiosity, so let me obviously curiosity is important,
Yeah.
but let me rephrase that. What I meant initially in your career, you need to be very skill focused, right? It doesn't matter whether you're doing engineering or physics or math or whatever have you, but you should be looking at building skills. As I
Okay.
said, transferable skills,
Right.
right? Whether that's in my instance, it was I loved writing. I picked that up from a very early age, and I have really like to get into first principles, which is why I have a deep interest in physics, because it allows you to, your foundational elements are very strong. So I always uh, bring to the table an ability to think from first principles, and that's a skill that you hone over time, right? So I definitely don't want to underplay the skills in the very early part of your career. It's really, really important that you over invest on building skills,
Right.
right? Transferable skills that people will pay you for, right? And as I said, it can be multitude of skills, and in the age of AI and ML today, those are another skills that people could pick up, right?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't underplay the development of skills, and it requires mastery, right? You need to master. Um, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell who said it's a 10,000 hour rule, right? You need to spend 10,000 hours to at least to get really skilled at some get really skilled at something that you want to learn, right? So I would definitely not underplay that. But as you identify in my present position, um, I think learning the writing bit still continues. I think I use that almost every day. The ability to communicate, I think that's really, really important. So as you grow into your career, as you sort of uh, cross the T's and dots the I's, as it were, your ability to communicate clearly, uh, your your ability to learn, right? That so it sort of feeds back to that curiosity element.
Yeah.
Uh, the ability to being comfortable with discomfort, right? The patience, right? These are skills that you hone as you go further along in your career,
Right.
right? So if you ask me what are the skills today that I'm trying to be better at, it would be the latter. These four that I would mention, that these are the skills that I'm trying to be better at. I can't claim to be perfect, but it's a journey, right?
Right.
So I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. So you studied science and physics precisely, and then now you are definitely in a role which is not directly relevant to what you might have studied. Sorry. So career shift is something which does make the thought alone makes people uncomfortable, because it comes with a lot of uncertainties that how would it go, would it really go as per the plan, or like I think you did mention that it's not just the outcome that one you would focus on, you would rather focus on your learning. So you mentioned that you studied physics, and then in your current role, just help us understand what exactly do you do, what area would it fall under?
So in my current role, as you rightly identify, Sanya, it's more of leadership.
Right.
Right. It's about steering people to objectives, to goals, to outcomes. Right.
Right.
We obviously run a business, right? So there are obviously deliverables.
Yeah.
There are results. There are revenue lines that we look at, right? So in my day to day, that's very much part of my day to day conversation, so to speak. Um, if you ask me, how does my academic preparation relate to this?
Mm-hmm.
The short answer is it doesn't, but it definitely has informed it. And
Okay.
let me expand on that.
Yeah.
Um, as I mentioned earlier, this aspect of first principles thinking is really important, right? I've benefited tremendously out of it because it allows me to break problems apart into its constituent elements
Right.
and then sort of interrogate those individual elements based on certain frameworks that we have, right? So the experience over n number of years has sort of hard coded certain experiences and frameworks
Right.
to my mind, right? So it allows us to filter what the information that we are receiving day to day from, uh, I could say, from my undergraduate experience in first principles thinking. And physics was a large part, has a very prominent role to play in that,
Mm-hmm.
right? My interest in writing has also a tremendous impact on what I do day to day, right? The fact that writing allows you to clear, putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, um allows you to clarify your thought process,
Right.
right? It brings tremendous amount of clarity, and to the point that I mentioned earlier, you need to be able to communicate clearly when you lead large teams
Right.
and people. You need to have the ability to have clear communication, so you can align people on what the end objectives are. So to answer your point, I think these two have been at the very forefront of. So these are transferable skills that
Yeah.
I have learned along the way and honed along the way. The skills that I mentioned earlier, right? And I use that in my day to day now. So
Right.
if you ask me, is my physics degree directly related to my present job? No, but it has informed it to a great extent.
Right.
Right.
And what made that shift happen, like from physics or science to what you are doing today, the career shift?
I honestly don't see it as a career shift. I
Okay.
look at it as a shift in perspective,
Okay.
right? And so it was not planned. I'm just following, a thread down a rabbit hole, so to speak,
Hmm.
right? So it's just a curiosity. I entered this field with virtually no knowledge of the sales and marketing engines,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that curiosity has helped me along the way to sort of both appreciate
Right.
and hone that skill that now I can deliver outcomes for people and organizations, right? So it is not, again, a linear path. It is not a sort of a something that has been pushed as a career change, but
Mhm.
something that has been following the curiosity angle.
So I think it's unique in its own way, the way you have made the choices, the way you have continued to carry the skills, hone them, and of course, you make them sound very much relevant, because you're very right. The transferable skills, they wouldn't be irrelevant no matter what industry you could be working in. So I think that's a very different way of putting that point across, and I hope our viewers do pick that up as well. So, talking about your work experiences now, obviously from studies to work, it's a huge shift. The level of coordination, collaboration, acceptance, and a lot of other things, that we have to learn and implement. So, what were your struggles at work as a fresher, and of course even today? Because, like I said, our viewers could be budding professionals, or they could actually be the seasoned ones. But I'm sure there's something we can always learn from your experiences. So yeah.
That's a good question. As a fresher, given that I was not from this industry, as a fresher, I always wanted to take on more. Means I was hungrier before the fact. So, and that meant that I wanted to get it all on my plate because I was following this thread of curiosity, right? I wanted to learn what my managers were doing. I wanted to learn what their peer group was doing, right? I wanted to obviously get exposed to the business at large. Navitas is a global business with a very large footprint, right? So there are different aspects to that. So I wanted to familiarize myself with all these different aspects and functions within an org, right? So very early on, I was drinking from a fire hose, right? It was not a straw. Now, so that was a challenge in its own way, right? It's about having that broad outlook, but yet being able to deliver for your immediate line managers what do they need on a day-to-day basis, right? So it was about balancing those competing priorities, right? Now, in the present role, I think even now I have aspects of competing priorities, and let me expand on what that means. It's about balancing competing priorities, would say short-term interests with long-term interests, right? So when I mean short-term is how does the next quarter look? Are we hitting our targets? As opposed to where do I see ourselves being in 2 years, in 3 years, in 5 years, right? How do I align that? How do I align solutions to that, right? In my present role. Another aspect that I find really important in my present role is navigating uncertainty, right? And let me expand on that. What I mean by navigating uncertainty is in our sector, you would admit that there are so many policy changes. There are market shifts, right? There are, geopolitical tensions, right? There are pandemic level events, right? How do you work under these circumstances? How do you motivate a workforce to stay true to mission, right? And in these times, it becomes really important to anchor yourselves to your mission and your values, right? So it's about, and it sort of comes back to the fact that you have to communicate clearly, right? Because hard times call for hard measures. You're speaking to people, and I would submit to you that the hardest part of my job is people management, right? I could talk about sales, I could talk about relationships, but managing people, their expectations, their anxieties during periods of change and turmoil is incredibly hard. Right? It's a massive gray area. You don't have set templated solutions for such things, right? So you need to address them head on. And what you mean by that is during such times, you need to be clear, right? You need to have the ability to meet someone where they are and say, hey, this is what it is. This is what we plan to do. This is how we would plan to go about it. And what are your roadblocks, right? So the ability to be clear in communication, the ability to be agile and nimble are really important, more so now than ever. Cycle times have changed, have compressed, so you need to be very agile, right? And you need to be clear in your decision making, right? right? Yes, empathy is important, but I think you need to, as I said, meet people where they are, and don't confuse sympathy with empathy, which is often the case, right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, so yeah, I would stop
And I
there.
think it's confusing for both the ends, the one who's managing the people and the one who's getting managed, because their expectation should be the empathy, but it's more of the sympathy that's unknowingly expected.
Managing people's emotions,
Yeah.
I think that's very difficult, right? Because at the end of the day, we are humans. There is psychology involved,
Absolutely.
right? There are behaviors involved. So that becomes very critical in senior roles as you go along the ladder. That becomes very important to manage set expectations, right? So I would submit to you that it's the people part, navigating uncertainty. Those are probably front and center to my mind in my present role.
Right. And I'm sure you would be working with the Gen Z as well. So
Right.
my experience of interacting and working with people, I don't like to categorize as Gen Z, I would be honest, but yeah, just say recent pass outs to keep it simple. Um, they want to work, they come to work, but they simply do not align with the goals of wherever they are showing up. Not all of them, of course, but yeah, we can say a majority of them lack that purpose and understanding of the larger picture. So it's more transactional. It should be transactional, but I would say that that emotional that emotion, I would call it as an emotion where you're connecting to a purpose, because every organization has a goal to achieve. There's a vision, there's a mission statement for a reason. So what would be your take on this, but also the advice that what is the importance of introspecting? There's a lot of content on social media floating where a conversation with the manager is going bad, and it's just perceived from a very one-sided position that, okay, if it's a harsh conversation, it's probably the manager who's not doing the right thing. But again, there's a lack of introspection that what could I be doing which could have been done better. So you also mentioned that something similar, that while you're managing people, you've got to meet where they are. So what would be your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so let's define Gen Z. So Gen Z would be anyone from between 12 and 28.
Yeah.
Present day.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, we have a lot of my colleagues are in that range, obviously. I will submit to you that is actually the other way around. I find them having purpose, having motivation, right? And I would submit to you that is actually the other way around. It's organizations that should define purpose. They have a role to play in that, right? I don't think we
Right.
can devolve ourselves of that aspect of purpose, finding purpose completely. Because it's easy to see from hindsight and say, oh, Gen Z doesn't have a purpose. But that's not true, right? It's also for the org to define that purpose. So it's about that clarity on day one, meeting where people are, defining that. It's about, I sort of go back to this book. It's one of my favorite books. There's this book called Man's Search for Meaning.
Yep.
By Viktor Frankl. And, he says that the purpose, it's getting happiness should not be the only outcome. It's about finding meaning.
Yep.
Right. And as managers, as leaders, it's our responsibility to help our younger colleagues to find meaning in what they do. So not answer just the what, but the why. Right. So the why becomes really important. And I often think that's probably, and I'm guilty of it as well. Perhaps sometimes I don't do it as well as I should. Right. I suppose mediums like this are really important because often as leaders we are so we're so attuned to coming to an audience with the message that we want to communicate, we often lose sight of what is the message they want to hear. Right? So there is a vast gap. And coming back to that Viktor Frankl's book, I think one of the things that I always recall from that book is, there is a space between response and stimulus and response. And that space is when you have the power to choose your response. Right? So the attribute of patience is also important in that. As I said, this is a skill that even I'm honing even now, right? Patience is in short supply. So I would submit to you that I would rephrase. I would say that it's not just on Gen Z, my younger colleagues, to have the purpose. It's about the organizations to also define meaning, the why. It's about organizations allowing our younger colleagues to do the work that inspires them, right? I think internally, to my mind, we always talk about KPIs in office, as is natural during all performance cycles. And I often look at KPIs as, I read this, I think it was one of those LinkedIn blurbs, and it says 4 KPIs: keeping people interested, keeping people informed, keeping people involved, right? And the fourth one escapes me, but definitely informed and interested, and involved. And the last one is inspired, keeping people inspired. And the way you transfer inspiration is living that yourself, right? Being present, right? As in those moments of uncertainty, as I mentioned, right, is being present. So you inspire people through example, through your own actions, and not necessarily give them a book to read, right? So it's along those lines. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, you have very well. And I think that's gotten me to my next question. Because you mentioned that it's also the organization who holds, and organization is known, but of course the leaders, the colleagues, everyone is a part of it. So as leaders, what would be your recommendation for the best practice to follow, especially in the times of firefighting? Like right now there's so much happening in the global space across industries. I'm sure there would be businesses who are struggling and just crawling through, trying to make to the other end. How do you still make sure that you are living up to those expectations, you are being more human in the situations? So what would be your advice to them, how they can keep giving that purpose to the team members constantly?
Look, I think it's really important for as you get of age, it's really important to develop an intellectual and moral center of gravity. And what do I mean by that? The intellectual center of gravity, as I mentioned, is the frameworks that you've developed over a lifetime of academics, of experiences, right? So it's the how to think.
Right.
I think perhaps more compelling than the intellectual center of gravity is the moral center. And the moral center sort of is the ethical part of that equation, right? It's about why. Why are you behaving in a certain way? Why are you doing certain actions, your behaviors, right? What are the values that you espouse? Sort of harkens back to that points on empathy, right? So it's really important, and this is not natural, right? It does not come one overnight.
Yeah.
You need to really, really build on it. As I said, sometimes it's really important to become comfortable being in discomfort.
Yeah.
Right. So I would say that it's really important to build on these skills, and I call them skills here, and find the spaces that allow you to do that, right? Find orgs that support that, right? For you to build this intellectual and moral center of gravity, right? Um, yeah, I always think ethics is what you have when no one's looking,
Yeah.
right? So it's really important to sort of double down on that aspect, and giving people the space that and the orgs who do that will be wildly successful, right? And it's also, I think, just as a side note to that, I think too often we allow consensus to cloud clarity, right? I want you to be nodding your head in a meeting, right? Not necessarily true. I much rather, at least that's how I operate. I much rather you tell me here is where things are wrong. This is how, this is my perspective. So I think having that approach as well, valuing that diversity, and diversity not just because it's a demographic, but diversity of thought, diversity of frameworks, diversity of thinking, those are equally important.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that's given the clarity to our viewers and also to me, for that matter, the things that I must not forget, even if the situation or the circumstance is not in the favor. And now we'll move on to our rapid fire. So my first question would be, what would be that word your colleagues would call you by? What name would they give to you?
I can think of many, but I think one of the
Yeah.
names would be consistent.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I show up every day.
All right. What would be the one skill that you would recommend one, uses at the workplace they must have?
It's very underrated and probably very overused as well. It's listening. I think we often listen to reply and not really listen. Like some of my best conversations I've had with colleagues, in a hallway, where, 5 minutes of being able to give them their voice, hearing them out, have has provided such a lot of clarity from on the ground, right? So yeah, I think the listening is would be one skill.
Okay. A travel experience that changed you?
It's my exposure as an international student. I think that was it was transformative in every sense of the term. Yeah, as I said, perspective.
Okay. One piece of advice that you got and you cherish? I'm sure there would be many, but
There are many.
Yeah.
I think the one that comes to mind is, you deserve everything that you work for, and not a penny more. And by that I mean that you really need to put in the work, right? So it's nice to aspire to that, I'm going abroad to study and all, but then, as I said, getting there and thriving there's a disconnect,
Yeah.
right? So do you put in the work? I think that's really important, and that's true for your professional relationships, that's true for your personal relationships as well.
Okay. And now the last one, your stress buster.
It has to be my daughter, who's a toddler, and the fact that she recognizes me now, and when I walk in through the door, that's a tremendous stress buster. So yeah, no two ways about it. And probably a distant second and third is a walk without gadgets,
Okay.
and probably Netflix with junk food. So
Okay, so I think there's a good time for everything to be of a
Right.
good stress buster. Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. So now we'll deep dive into your experience as an international student, because that would involve pretty much starting from zero, discovering yourself and a lot of other things. Um, my favorite is talking about the part-time jobs, because I strongly feel that they should be a part of our lives in India as well. They are slightly getting popular because I think of the freelancing culture that has come in, but still it's not as welcomed by parents or even students for that matter. So what would be your thoughts on, from your experience of course, that how part-time jobs can actually shape you into a better person and a professional as well?
I think part-time jobs are immensely important, and it doesn't have to be in the field that you want to. Um, I think even till this day, one of my best jobs that I have held was working in the health sciences library in college, right? is because I worked the late night shift, given class schedules, and it brought a tremendous amount of discipline. So just to give you another quote from a book, uh, you know, th- there's this book that's come out. It's Atomic Habits, right? And
Yeah.
I think one of the takeaways from the books is um you fall to the level of your systems, right? Uh, you don't rise to your goals, but you fall to your level of your systems. So, and obviously that's a new book, but I realized that in college is that the the discipline that was there through that job, and it was a job of um, stacking books, photocopying for doctors their articles that they wanted next day, researching an article that the doctor wanted with multiple, make a bibliography essentially. Um, so you could argue it is thankless job, but in hindsight, I thought it was so instructive. It's a transferable skill that I use
Yeah.
even today, right? That discipline, right? So I would submit to you that having a part-time jobs is really important, even if it is flipping burgers, right? I think it's really important to have a part-time job because it brings discipline into your system. It allows you to make a system, right?
Right.
And like I said, be intentional.
Yeah.
You never know when that learning will be really important, right? So
Right.
yeah, it's a culture that India should encourage. It's also a question of I think harkens back to the idea of dignity of labor. I think
Yeah.
it's very easy to find folks, and it's not anything against them, but it's just the culture that you've been brought up that hey, you're working in a library, you're working in a burger flipping joint, it's beneath
Yeah.
you, you've gone there for engineering, what are you doing, right? So but I think those are very transformative and instructive experiences,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, who knows that you might start a business that solves a pain point that you've identified
Exactly.
in your internship, right? Which was the purpose of that education to begin with,
Right.
right? So, or that part-time job. So, yeah.
So I think it's much beyond just money making or
Yeah, I think very early on in your career, money is not the money should
Yeah.
never be the end goal like, at least that's how I
Yeah.
think. Money should not be the end goal. It's about that impact that you create. It's about what you learn out of it, right? The
Right.
failure is I think it's not failure, but failure is not optional, right? I mean, failure is not the opposite of success.
Yeah.
It's part of that journey,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
So you must have had a goal or an outcome in mind that okay, after my degree abroad, this is what I want to be, or this has to be the outcome. So did it serve you right? Is it exactly how it went, or was there a change of course while you were there?
I think in my instance, I was, as I said, I was following a curiosity. I went into my PhD post my undergrad because I was following a thread that had me interested. So I applied to the institutions that were doing the research that I wanted to pursue. And I got an opportunity to work with a research group that allowed me to pursue that interest. Right. During that course, I was fairly young in my um, in my inclination at that point of time, and during the course, I realized that I was too focused too early, and my strengths were actually much broader. Right. I was distracted, if you can call it that, by a lot of the other things that are going along. Right. So I was motivated by what I was seeing my friends working in Silicon Valley at that point of time were doing in their startups. So I was pulled away uh, from my program to work in that environment. Right. I don't regret it, but it was tremendously instructive, as I said. So there was a lot of discomfort when we were doing that. Even in that environment where I was working, there was a lot of discomfort because things are never the same day to
Yeah.
day. Right. So I think so. It was never planned, but it was always curiosity, and then sometimes curiosity and circumstances act as forcing functions, which mean that they force you to start thinking differently when opportunities don't line up the way that you imagined them, and then you start looking at, okay, what else can be done with those transferable skills that you have.
Right.
So I would submit to you, it was not, again, it was not linear. It was, yeah. So all those skills, all those experiences have informed me where I am today.
Right. So, for people who are just starting off in leadership roles, or who do aspire to be in one, sometime in their future, what would be your advice? You did mention about people management, and that being the center of everything that we do. So, what would be your advice to them about managing people?
I think it's really important to build trust.
Hmm.
And trust, again, sort of goes back to those uh, first principles of purpose, defining purpose, clarity in communication, clarity of goal setting, right? Followed by that element of compassion and empathy. All that brings trust, right? All that builds trust.
Right.
Relationships, incredibly important, right? In any business, but I can definitely attest to you, in our business, relationships are so critical, right? How do you build on these relationships, right? What do you need to do? And that's a function of trust, right? So, young leaders, I use that for myself as well. I'm not immune to that. You need to step out of your comfort zone in each of those instances, right? And there are all kinds of folks, right? There are extroverts, there are introverts. It's really a question of stepping out of those comfort zones and being comfortable in discomfort, but doing that work. You deserve, going back to that statement, you deserve everything and not a penny more. So you have to put in the work. So I would submit that.
And you briefly mentioned about failure as a part of the process for success. So, how would you, embrace failures? Would you like to share an instance from your lifetime where you might have been in a situation which we all get a lot of such situations, but yeah, some do stay on top of our head. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there have been many failures, to be honest. Personally, professionally, uh, personally, relationships, right, don't always work out the way you want them to, imagine them to be. And those instances always are pivotal in interrogating what went wrong.
Yeah.
Professionally, I mentioned I've worked in a startup environment. It was replete with failures, right? Plans never go according to plan, right?
Yeah.
It only lasts till first contact, and then you improvise and you adapt, right? So, but here is my point. Failure is not optional. I think it's part of that process. The question is, one should not, and I'm speaking this from hindsight, not at the time I was experiencing these failures rather. I think it's really important to not let it pass, in the sense that you should dwell on it, you should interrogate it, you should dissect it and learn from it, right? Human memory and behavior and tendencies are that we tend to skip as quickly as possible to get over that,
Right.
right? And I think, to my mind, that is doing a disservice to the opportunity that failure creates. It's about that learning, right? So you have to be really comfortable in that discomfort. Question that why this relationship did not work the way it should have,
Yeah.
right? And take that learning to the next opportunity that you find, right? That itself is an opportunity, right? So
Yep.
I think that's what I would mention.
Yeah, I think we've touched upon very useful points that our viewers can definitely make use of, and it was a great chat with you today. Anything that you would like to say before we wrap up?
So, Sanya, you've benefited from having me on the receiving end of this. So,
Yeah.
tell me, from your vantage point, what are some of the most insightful things you've heard your guests speak about?
Definitely the importance. So I have been talking to guests who have just entered their careers and who have been very experienced like yourself. The ones who have entered, I think that was something more experimental. The experiences they shared. I was also talking to another guest who pretty much said similar things as you, where doing things intentionally counted really, and embracing what comes along the way. So that is something which's been common. Transferable skills, the importance of those. I think you definitely can talk all about it. And this is exactly what I was thinking just while you were talking, that they do hold a lot of value, because if that's what someone with decades of experience can talk about, then of course knowledge is important, but then skills definitely is something which should not be forgotten. Yeah, and I think yeah. So I would just circle down on these 2 to 3 things. Yeah.
And how do you see, sort of coming back to our sector, our industry, how do you see the student, you've been obviously you meet with a lot of students, you speak to their parents. How do you see the student journey evolving?
Yeah.
What is important today as opposed to 5 years back?
I think that's something I and my colleagues we talk a lot about in current times. My personal observation of the changes that have happened over time is that we are, as an industry, as an international education industry, we are coming back to the basics, is how I see it. We are valuing the quality more. We are valuing the outcomes more, and outcomes which are not PR, outcomes which are not just a job, which could be anything and there's no thought to it. Where parents are trying to make more informed decisions, so they're not stuck at Australia or Canada alone. They're actually wanting to explore more things. I have definitely seen a time before the pandemic and just after the pandemic for 1 or 2 years where they just wanted to go anywhere, and good students as well. I have seen a shift in people blindly going to MBAs, towards going for more specialized courses. So I think all stakeholders, our universities, governments for that matter, parents, students, agents, we all are becoming uh, more human centric. We are becoming more realistic in our expectations from what we need. And I really like it because it's tiring. I see this as a very noble profession where we are here, we are talking to students, trying to make a difference in their lives for no selfish reasons. So I definitely like the philosophic way of how it's going on. Yeah.
Are we communicating correctly? Like, I always think that I'm not being able to reach my audience because I'm perhaps not on a certain platform, or perhaps my. So, what would be your advice be for someone like me who's perhaps not as connected to the ground as I must have wished to be? What would be your advice? Is it like a platform that I'm not on? Is it like TikTok, or is it, Twitter, or I mean X right now? But what is it that we are missing? You mentioned outcome, obviously.
Yeah.
And I get the fact that we probably should come across more as mentors and not stuffy executives from a company or an org. So, what would be your thoughts?
My preferences, like if I I can definitely speak for myself. So my expectations from a leader would definitely be one who has the patience, which you did mention, who has the patience to listen, to understand what I am experiencing, at the ground level. Because a lot of times you as leaders could be hearing a lot of things. We I might not have, for that matter, much idea about it, but it's more so important that you give an ear to what's happening at the ground level, because I feel it's Chinese whisper. If we are not taking direct feedback, and we are respecting it, because it's, sometimes it's like you're just on the, on the run, and okay, just tell us quickly what is going on. And sometimes, okay, you're just calling that person to understand how is it going, not just about their work, but what their general view is. Because as colleagues, we observe, we look around a lot and we compare a lot. And we also give, the preference or the priority to personal goals. If someone's personal goals are not being looked after, not that it's a leader's responsibility to do so, but I feel that it's very, very important to have some point where the personal and professional goals align with each other. Because if they're going in different directions, and there's no way I feel that a person can be happy in what they're doing. So, helping the person find that happiness at work, I think, is something very, very important. And that can only happen when we are listening and when we are patient enough to listen even to the not so important bits of, getting the feedback. Yeah.
Thanks, Sanya. It was good. Thank you.
Great. I think it's interesting for me to be on the speaking side of this podcast. But yeah, I would really say that thanks a lot for being our guest today. It was lovely having you here.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Sanya.
Thank you.